At 12 years of age, the child Jesus goes with his parents to Jerusalem, and he conceals himself from them in the temple. As I have said, Mary and Joseph repeated their visit to the temple at the Feast of the Unleavened Bread every year. Also, when the divine child was 12 years old, and when it was time to allow the splendors of his inaccessible and divine light to shine forth, they went to the temple for this feast. Luke 2:42. This festival of the unleavened bread lasted 7 days, according to the command of the divine law. And the more solemn days were the first and the last. On this account, our heavenly pilgrims remained in Jerusalem during the whole week, spending their time in acts of worship and devotion as the rest of the Jews, although on account of the sacraments connected with each of them, their worship and devotion was entirely different and greatly exalted above that of the others. The Blessed Mother and Holy Joseph received during these days favors and blessings beyond the conception of the human mind. Having thus spent all the 7 days of the feast, they betook themselves on their way home to Nazareth. When his parents departed from Jerusalem and were pursuing their way homeward, the child Jesus withdrew from them without their knowledge. For this purpose the Lord availed himself of the separation of the men and women, which had become customary among the pilgrims for reasons of decency as well as for greater recollection during their return homeward. The children which accompanied their parents were taken in charge promiscuously either by the men or the women, since their company with either was a matter of indifference. Thus it happened that St. Joseph could easily suppose that the child Jesus had remained with his most holy mother, with whom he generally remained. The thought that she would go without him was far from his mind, since the heavenly Queen loved and delighted in him more than any other creature, human or angelic. The great lady did not have so many reasons for supposing that her most holy Son was in the company of St. Joseph, but the Lord himself so diverted her thoughts by holy and divine contemplations that she did not notice his absence at first. When afterwards she became aware of her not being accompanied by her sweetest and beloved Son, she supposed that the blessed Joseph had taken him along, and that the Lord accompanied his foster father for his consolation. Thus assured, Holy Mary and Joseph pursued their home journey for an entire day, as St. Luke tells us. As the pilgrims proceeded onwards, they gradually thinned out, each taking his own direction and joining again with his wife or family. The Most Holy Mary and St. Joseph found themselves at length in the place where they had agreed to meet on the first evening after leaving Jerusalem. When the great lady saw that the child was not with St. Joseph, and when the Holy Patriarch found that he was not with his mother, the two were struck dumb with amazement and surprise for quite a while. Both, governed in their judgment by their most profound humility, felt overwhelmed with self-reproach at their remissness in watching over their most holy Son, and thus blamed themselves for his absence, for neither of them had any suspicion of the mysterious manner in which he had been able to elude their vigilance. After a time they recovered somewhat from their astonishment, and with deepest sorrow took counsel with each other as to what was to be done. Luke 2:45. The loving mother said to St. Joseph, quote, "My spouse and my master, my heart cannot rest unless we return with all haste to Jerusalem in order to seek my most holy Son." Unquote. This they proceeded to do, beginning their search among their relations and friends, of whom, however, none could give them any information or any comfort in their sorrow. On the contrary, their answers only increased their anxiety, since none of them had so much as seen their son since their departure from Jerusalem. The afflicted mother turned to her holy angels, those that carried the eschaton's inscribed with the most holy name of Jesus, of which I spoke at the circumcision, had accompanied the Lord, while the other angels still remained with the purest mother. This was the order maintained whenever the son separated from the mother. These, who numbered 10,000, she asked, saying, quote, "My friends and companions, you well know the cause of my sorrow. In this bitter affliction, be my consolation and give me some information concerning my beloved, so that I may seek and find him." Canticles 3:2. Give some relief to my wounded heart, which, torn from its happiness in life, bounds from its place in search of him. Unquote. The holy angels, who, though they never lost sight of the Creator and Redeemer, were aware that the Lord wished to furnish his mother this occasion of great merit, and that it was not yet time to reveal the secret to her, answered by speaking to her words of consolation, without manifesting to her the whereabouts and doings of their Lord. This evasive answer raised new doubts in the most prudent lady. Her anxiety of heart caused her to break out in tears and sighs of inmost grief, and urged her onward in search, not of the lost drachm, like the woman in the Gospel, but of the whole treasure of heaven and earth. Luke 15:8. The Mother of Wisdom then began to discuss within her heart the different possibilities. The first thought which presented itself to her was the fear lest Archelaus, imitating the cruelty of his father Herod, should have obtained notice of the presence of Jesus and have taken him prisoner. Although she knew from the Holy Scriptures and revelations, and by her conversations with her most holy Son and Teacher, that the time for his passion and death had not yet come, and that the king would not take away his life, yet she was filled with dread at the thought that they should have taken him prisoner and might ill-treat him. In her profoundest humility she also had misgivings, lest perchance she had in any way displeased him by her conduct, and therefore deserved that he should leave her, and take up his abode in the desert with his precursor St. John. At other times, addressing her absent love, she exclaimed, quote, "Sweet love and delight of my soul, thou art impelled by thy desire of suffering for men, and by thy immense charity to avoid no labor or pain. But on the contrary, I fear, O Lord and Master, that thou seekest it on purpose." Isaiah 53:7. "Whither shall I go, and whither shall I find thee, light of my eyes?" Tobit 10:4. "Dost thou wish to deprive me of life by the sword of severance from thy presence? But I do not wonder, O my highest good, thou chastisest by thy absence her who did not know how to profit by thy company. Why, O my Lord, hast thou enriched me with the delights of thy infancy, if I am so soon to lose the assistance of thy loving instruction? But woe is me, since not being worthy to retain and enjoy thee as my son, I must confess that I am obliged to thank thee even for the favor of condescending to accept me as thy slave. If the privilege of being thy unworthy mother can be of any avail in finding thee, my God and my highest good, do thou, O Lord, permit it, and make me worthy of again finding thee, so that I may go with thee in the desert to sufferings, labors, tribulations, or whatever thou wilt. My Lord, my soul desires to merit at least in part to share thy sorrows and torments, to die, if I do not find thee, or to live in thy service and presence. When thy divinity hid itself from my gaze, thy amiable humanity at least remained, and although thou wast austere and less kind to me than thou hadst been, I could throw myself at thy feet. But now this happiness is taken away from me, and I have lost sight entirely of the sun which enlightens me, left only to groans and sighs. Ah, love of my soul, what sighs from the inmost of my heart can I send thee as messengers, that I am not worthy of thy clemency, since my eyes find no trace of thee." Unquote. Thus the sincerest dove persevered in her tears and groans without cessation or rest, without sleeping or eating anything for 3 whole days. Although the 10,000 angels accompanied her in corporal forms and witnessed her affliction and sorrow, yet they gave her no clue to find her lost child. On the 3rd day the great queen resolved to seek him in the desert where St. John was, for since she saw no indications that Archelaus had taken him prisoner, she began to believe more firmly that her most holy Son was with St. John. When she was about to execute her resolve, and was on the point of departing for the desert, the holy angels detained her, urging her not to undertake the journey, since the divine word was not there. She wanted also to go to Bethlehem, in the hope of finding him in the cave of the Nativity, but this the holy angels likewise prevented, telling her that he was not so far off. Although the Blessed Mother heard these answers, and well perceived that the holy angels knew the whereabouts of the child Jesus, she was so considerate and reserved in her humility and prudence that she gave no response, nor asked where she could find him, for she understood that they withheld this information by command of the Lord. With such magnanimous reverence did the Queen of the Angels treat the sacraments of the Most High and of his ministers and ambassadors. 2 Maccabees 2:9. This was one of the occasions in which the greatness of her queenly and magnanimous heart was made manifest. I think that's Maccabees. It says 2 Mach.29. Not all the sorrows suffered by all the martyrs ever reached the height of the sorrows of Most Holy Mary in this trial, nor will the patience, resignation, and tolerance of this lady ever be equaled, nor can they. For the loss of Jesus was greater to her than the loss of anything created, while her love and appreciation of him exceeded all that can be conceived by any other creature. Since she did not know the cause of the loss, her anxiety was beyond all measure, as I have already said. Moreover, during these 3 days, the Lord left her to her natural resources of nature and of grace, deprived of special privileges and favors, for, with the exception of the company and intercourse of the angels, he suspended all the other consolations and blessings so constantly vouchsafed to her most holy soul. From all this we can surmise what sorrow filled the loving heart of the Heavenly Mother. But, O prodigy of holiness, prudence, fortitude, and perfection! In such unheard-of affliction and sorrow she was not disturbed, nor lost her interior or exterior peace, nor did she entertain a thought of anger or indignation, nor allowed herself any improper movement or expression, nor fell into any excess of grief or annoyance, as is so common in great affliction with other children of Adam, who allow all their passions and faculties to be disarranged, yea, even in small difficulties. The mistress of all virtue held all her powers in heavenly order and harmony, though her sorrow was without comparison great and had pierced her inmost heart. She failed not to reverence, and in the praise of the Lord, she failed not in reverence and in praise of the Lord, nor ceased in her prayers and petitions for the human race, and for the finding of her most holy Son. With this heavenly wisdom, and with greatest diligence, she sought him for 3 successive days, roaming through the streets of the city, asking different persons and describing to the daughters of Jerusalem the marks of her beloved, searching the byways and the open squares of the city, and thereby fulfilling what was recorded in the Canticles of Solomon. Canticles 5:10. Some of the women asked her what were the distinctive marks of her lost and only son, and she answered in the words of the spouse, quote, "My beloved is white and ruddy, chosen out of thousands," unquote. One of the women, hearing her thus describe him, said, quote, "This child, with those same marks, came yesterday to my door to ask for alms, and I gave some to him, and his grace and beauty have ravished my heart. And when I gave him alms, I felt myself overcome by compassion to see a child so gracious in poverty and want," unquote. These were the first news the sorrowful mother heard of her only begotten. In Jerusalem, a little respited in her sorrow, she pursued her quest and met other persons who spoke of him in like manner. Guided by this information, she directed her steps to the hospital of the city, thinking that among the afflicted she would find the spouse and the originator of patient poverty among his own legitimate brethren and friends. Matthew 5:40. Inquiring at that place, she was informed that a child of that description had paid his visits to the inmates, leaving some alms and speaking words of much consolation to the afflicted. The report of these doings of her beloved caused sentiments of sweetest and most tender affection in the heart of the heavenly lady, which she sent forth from her inmost heart as messengers to her lost and absent son. Then the thought struck her that since he was not with the poor, he no doubt tarried in the temple, as in the house of God and of prayer. The holy angels encouraged her and said, quote, Our Queen and Lady, the hour of thy consolation is at hand. Soon wilt thou see the light of thy eyes. Hasten thy footsteps, and go to the temple." Unquote. The glorious patriarch, St. Joseph, at this moment again met his spouse, for, in order to increase their chance of finding the divine child, they had separated in different directions. By another angel, he had now been likewise ordered to proceed to the temple. During all these 3 days he had suffered unspeakable sorrow and affliction, hastening from one place to another, sometimes without his heavenly spouse, sometimes with her. He was in serious danger of losing his life during this time, if the hand of the Lord had not strengthened him, and if the most prudent lady had not consoled him and forced him to take some food and rest. His sincere and exquisite love for the divine child made him so anxious and solicitous to find him that he would have allowed himself no time for care to take nourishment for the support of nature. Following the advice of the holy princes, the most pure Mary and Joseph betook themselves to the temple, where happened that I will relate in the next chapter. I thought about reading for LibriVox, but I mess up too much. Instruction given to me by the Queen of Heaven, Most Holy Mary. My daughter, by oft-repeated experience, mortals know that they do not lose sorrow without what once they have possessed with delight. This truth, so well established, should convince men what little love they have for their God and Creator, since among the many who lose him, there are so few who heartily grieve at this loss, and thereby show that they have never possessed or loved him with a love flowing from grace. Just as they fail to grieve at losing the highest good, which they do not hold in loving possession, so they also fail to seek after their God when they have lost him. But there is a great difference in the manner in which men lose sight of their highest good, for it is not the same to lose sight of God for the purpose of being tried in virtue and love, and to lose sight of him in punishment for sins committed. The first is a contrivance of divine love and a means of communicating itself more abundantly to the one that longs for it and merits it. The second is a just punishment for outrages committed against the divinity. In the first kind of absence, the Lord humiliates the soul by holy fear and filial love, leaving it uncertain whether it has not given cause for his withdrawal. Proverbs 28:13. Although its conscience does not reprehend it, the loving and ingenious heart knows its danger, feels the loss, and thus, as a wise man says, is blessed. Ecclesiastes 9:1. For it then lives in constant fear and dread of such a loss, knowing that man, until the end of this life, is uncertain whether he deserves love or hate in the sight of God. During their mortal existence, the just man and the sinner commonly share the same good and evil lot without much distinction. This is the great evil which the wise man mentions as among the happenings under the sun. That the impious and the wicked harden their hearts in their malice and false security, seeing that the same mishaps befall both themselves and others, and that no one can tell with certainty who are the chosen or the reprobate, the friends or enemies of God, the just or the sinners, who are worthy of love and who of hatred. But if men would dispassionately and without deceit appeal to their conscience, it would answer each one truthfully what he should know. Luke 12:58. For when it cries out against sins committed, they would be foolish not to attribute the evils and adversities to themselves, or to fail to see themselves forsaken by grace and deprived of the highest good. If their reason were unbiased, the greatest source of misgiving would be to be unmoved by the loss or by the cessation of the spiritual joys of grace. For the want of this misgiving in a soul created and destined for eternal happiness is a strong indication that the soul neither desires nor loves this happiness. And therefore it is a sign that it does not seek it in earnest, so as to enjoy a well-founded prospect of once possessing the highest good. For thou must remember that this well-founded assurance of not having forfeited it in this mortal life can be attained by all faithful souls. I was deprived of the bodily presence of my most holy Son, but although I was in hope of again finding him, yet in my great love the uncertainty as to the cause of his withdrawal gave me no rest until I found him. In this I wish that thou, my dearest, imitate me, whether thou lose him through thy own fault or by the disposition of his own will. So great should be thy dread of losing him through any fault, that neither tribulation, nor trouble, nor necessity, nor danger, nor persecution, nor the sword, neither height nor depth should ever withhold thee from seeking after thy God. Romans 8:35. For if thou art faithful, as thou shouldest be, and if thou dost not wish to lose him, neither the angels, nor the principalities, nor the powers, nor any other creature can ever deprive thee of him. So strong are the bonds of his love and its chains that no one can burst them except thy own free will. That is so wonderful. After 3 days, Most Holy Mary and Saint Joseph find the child Jesus in the temple disputing with the teachers. In the foregoing chapter, a partial answer might be found to the question raised by some as to how the Heavenly Queen, who was so diligent and solicitous in attending upon and serving her Most Holy Son, could ever so far lose him out of sight as to leave him in Jerusalem. Although it would be a sufficient answer to say that the Lord himself brought it about, yet I will now explain more fully how it could have happened without any voluntary negligence or oversight of the loving mother. It is certain that besides availing himself of the great concourse of people, our Lord was obliged to use also supernatural means to elude the attention of his solicitous mother, for without it she could no more have lost sight of him than of the sun that lighted her on her way. Therefore, at the parting of the men and the women which I mentioned, the Almighty Lord visited his heavenly mother with an abstractive vision of the divinity, which the divine power centered and withdrew all her faculties, toward her interior. She thus remained so abstracted, inflamed and deprived of her senses, that she could make use of them only in so far as was necessary to pursue her way. As to all the rest, she was entirely lost in the sweetness and consolation of the divine vision. Saint Joseph was guided in his behavior by the circumstances already mentioned, although he was wrapped in a most exalted contemplation, which made more easy and mysterious his error in regard to the whereabouts of the child. Thus Jesus withdrew himself from both of them, remaining in Jerusalem. When after a considerable while the queen came to herself and found herself without the company of her most holy son, she supposed him to be with his reputed father. It was very near to the gate of the city that the divine child turned and hastened back through the streets. Foreseeing in his divine foreknowledge all that was to happen, he offered it up to his eternal Father for the benefit of souls. He asked for alms during these 3 days, in order to ennoble from that time on humble mendicity as the firstborn of holy poverty. He visited the hospitals of the poor, consoling them and giving them the alms which he had received. Secretly he restored bodily health to some and spiritual health to many, by enlightening them interiorly and leading them back to the way of salvation. On some of the benefactors who gave him alms, he performed these wonders with a greater abundance of grace and light, thus fulfilling from that time on the promise which he was afterwards to make to his church, that he who gives to the just and to the prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive the reward of the just. Matthew 10:41. Having thus busied himself with these and other works of his Father, he betook himself to the temple. On the day which the evangelist mentions, it happened that also the rabbis, who were the learned and the teachers of the temple, met in a certain part of the buildings in order to confer among themselves concerning some doubtful points of Holy Scriptures. On this occasion the coming of the Messiah was discussed, for on account of the report of the wonderful events which had spread about since the birth of the Baptist and the visit of the kings of the East, the rumor of the coming of the Redeemer and of his being already in the world, though yet unknown, had gained ground among the Jews. They were all seated in their places, filled with the sense of authority customary to those who are teachers and considered as learned. The child Jesus came to the meeting of these distinguished men, and he that was the King of kings and Lord of lords, Apocalypse 19:16, the infinite wisdom itself, 1 Corinthians 1:24, and who corrects the wise, Wisdom 7:15, presented himself before the teachers of this world as an humble disciple, giving them to understand that he had come to hear the discussion and inform himself on the question treated of, namely, whether the Messiah was already come, or, if not, concerning the time in which he should come into the world. The opinions of the scribes were much at variance on this question, some of them answering in the affirmative, others in the negative. Those in the negative quoted some testimonies of Holy Scriptures and prophecies with the coarse interpretation reprehended by the Apostle, namely, killing the Spirit by the letter, 2 Corinthians 3:6. They maintained that the Messiah was to come with a kingly magnificence and display in order to secure the liberty of his people by the exercise of great power, rescuing them in a temporal manner from the slavery of the Gentiles. Yet that there were no indications of this power and freedom in the present state of the Hebrews, and no possibility of throwing off the yoke of the Romans. This outward circumstance was an argument of great force among this carnal and blinded people, for they presumed that the coming greatness and majesty of the promised Messiah and the redemption was intended for themselves only, and they believed this redemption to be temporal and earthly, just as even now the Jews, in the obscurity which envelops their hearts, Isaiah 6:10, continue to believe. For to the present day they have not yet come to realize that the glory, the majesty, and the power of the Redeemer, and the liberty which he is to bring to the world, is not of an earthly, temporal, and perishable kind, but heavenly, spiritual, and eternal, and that it is not intended alone for the Jews, although offered to them before all other nations, but indiscriminately for the whole human race descended from Adam. 1 Corinthians 3:15. The teacher of truth, Jesus, foresaw that the discussion would end with the confirmation of this error, for although some of the learned men inclined to the contrary opinion, They were but few, and they had now been silenced by the authority and spacious arguments of the others. As the Lord had come into the world in order to give testimony of the truth, John 18:37, which was he himself, he would not on this occasion, when it was so important to manifest the truth, allow that the deceit and error opposed to it should be confirmed and established by the authority of the learned. His measureless charity could not pass by unnoticed this ignorance of his works and high purposes in these men, who were set as teachers of the people in matters concerning eternal life and its author, our Redeemer. Therefore, the divine child presented himself to the disputants, manifesting the grace poured out over his lips. Psalms 44:3. He stepped into their midst with exceeding majesty and grace, as one who would propose some doubt or solution. By his pleasing appearance, he awakened in the hearts of these learned men a desire to hear him attentively. The divine child spoke to them as follows, quote, "The question concerning the coming of the Messiah and the answer given to it, I have heard and understood completely. In order to propose my difficulty in regard to its solution, I presuppose what the prophets say, that his coming shall be in great power and majesty, which has also been confirmed by the testimonies brought forward. For Isaiah says that he shall be our lawgiver and king, who shall save his people, Isaiah 30:27. And David, that he shall crush all his enemies, Psalms 94:3. Daniel, that all tribes and nations shall serve him, Daniel 7:14. Ecclesiasticus, that he shall come with a great multitude of the saints, Ecclesiasticus 24:3. All the prophets and scriptures are full of similar promises, manifesting his characteristics clearly and decisively enough for all those that study them with enlightened attention. But the doubt arises from the comparison of these with other passages in the prophets, since all of them must be equally true, though on account of their brevity they may appear to contradict each other. Therefore they must agree with each other in another sense, which can and must be found equally applicable in all the passages. How then shall we understand what this same Isaiah says of him, that he shall come from the land of the living, and when he asks, who shall declare his generation, Isaiah 53:8, that he shall be satiated with reproach, that he shall be led as a sheep to the slaughter, and that he shall not open his mouth. Jeremiah states that the enemies of the Messiah shall join hands to persecute him and mix poison with his bread, and they shall wipe out his name from the earth, although they shall not prevail in their attempt. Jeremiah 11:19. David says that he shall be the reproach of the people and of men, and shall be trodden under foot, and shall be despised as a worm. Psalms 21:78. Zachary, that he shall come meek and humble, seated upon an insignificant beast. Zacharias 9:9. All the prophecies say the same concerning the signs of the promised Messiah. Unquote. Hence, added the divine child, how will it be possible to reconcile these prophecies if we suppose that the Messiah is to come with the power and majesty of arms in order to conquer all the kings and monarchs by violence and foreign bloodshed? We cannot fail to see that he has come twice, once to redeem the world, and a second time to judge it. The prophecies must be applied to both these comings, giving to each one its right explanation. As the purpose of these comings are different, so must also the conditions be different, for he is not to exercise the same office in both, but widely divergent and opposite offices. In the first advent, he is to overthrow the demon, hurling him from his sovereignty over souls obtained through the first sin, and therefore he must first render satisfaction to God for the whole human race, then also teach men by his word and example the way of eternal life, how they are to overcome their enemies, serve and adore their God and Redeemer, how they must correspond to the gifts and use well the blessings of his right hand. All these requirements the Messiah must fulfill in the first coming. The second coming is for the purpose of exacting an account from all men in the general judgment, of giving to each one the return for his works, good or bad, chastening his enemies in his wrath and indignation. This is what the prophets say of his second coming." Unquote. Quote, "Accordingly, when we wish to understand how his first coming shall be in power and majesty, or as David says, that he shall reign from sea to sea, that in his advent he shall be glorious, as said by the other prophets, all this cannot be interpreted as referring to visible and terrestrial sovereignty, with all its outward show of pomp and majesty, but of a spiritual reign in a new church, which would be extended over all the earth with sovereign power and riches of grace and virtue in opposition to the demon. By this interpretation, the whole Scripture becomes clear, while in another sense its different parts cannot be made to harmonize. That the people of the Jews are under dominion of the Romans and are in no condition to restore their sovereignty, not only cannot be held as a proof of his not having come, but on the contrary, it is an infallible sign that he has already come into the world. For our patriarch Jacob has pointed out this very sign for the guidance of his posterity, commanding them to expect the Messiah as soon as they should see the tribe of Judah deprived of the scepter and sovereignty of Israel. Genesis 49:10. And you must confess that neither Judah nor any other tribe of Israel can hope to recover or hold it. The same is also proved by the weeks of Daniel 9:25, which must certainly be now complete. Those who wish can also remember that a few years ago a light was seen in Bethlehem at midnight, and that some poor shepherds heard the message of the newborn Redeemer. And soon after some kings of the east came guided by a star, seeking the King of the Jews in order to adore him. All this had been prophesied. Herod, the father of Archelaus, believing it an established fact, took away the life of so many children, hoping thereby to destroy the newborn king, whom he feared as his rival in the government of Israel." Unquote. Other arguments did the child Jesus add, and while seeming to ask questions, he taught with a divine efficacy. The scribes and learned men who heard him were all dumbfounded. Convinced by his arguments, they looked at each other and in great astonishment asked, quote, "What miracle is this? What prodigy of a boy? Whence has he come, and who is this child?" Unquote. But though thus astonished, they did not recognize or suspect who it was, and thus taught and enlightened them concerning such an important truth. During this time, and before Jesus had finished his argument, his most holy mother and Saint Joseph, her most chaste spouse, arrived, just in time to hear him advance his last arguments. When he had finished, all the teachers of the law arose with stupendous amazement. The heavenly lady, absorbed in joy, approached her most loving son, and in the presence of the whole assembly spoke to him the words recorded by St. Luke, quote, "Son, why hast thou done so to us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing." Unquote. Luke 4:48. This loving complaint the heavenly mother uttered with equal reverence and affection, adoring him as God and manifesting her maternal affection. The Lord answered, quote, "Why is it that you sought me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" Unquote. The evangelist says that they did not understand the mystery of these words, Luke 2:50, for it was hidden at the time to Most Holy Mary and Saint Joseph. And for two reasons. On the one hand, the interior joy of now reaping what they had sown in so much sorrow, and the visible presence of their precious treasure, entirely filled the faculties of their souls, and on the other hand, the time for the full comprehension of what had just been treated of in this discussion had not yet arrived for them. Moreover, for the most solicitous queen there was another hindrance just at that time, and it was that the veil concealing the interior of her most holy Son had again intervened and was not removed until some time later. The learned men departed, commenting in their amazement upon the wonderful event by which they had been privileged to hear the teaching of eternal wisdom, though they did not recognize it. Being thus left almost alone, the Blessed Mother, embracing him with maternal affection, said to him, quote, "Permit my longing heart, my son, to give expression to its sorrow and pain, so that it may not die of grief as long as it can be of use to thee. Do not cast me off from thy sight, but accept me as thy slave. If it was my negligence which deprived me of thy presence, pardon me and make me worthy of thy company, and do not punish me with thy absence." Unquote. The divine child received her with signs of pleasure and offered himself as her teacher and companion until the proper time should arrive. Thus was the dove-like and affectionate heart of the great lady appeased, and they departed for Nazareth. But at some distance from Jerusalem, when they were alone upon the road, the most prudent lady fell on her knees before her son and adored him, asking his benediction, for she had not thus reverenced him openly in presence of the people in the temple, being always anxious to conduct herself with the perfection of holiness. With loving tenderness, the child Jesus raised her from the ground and spoke to her words of sweetest comfort. Immediately the veil fell, revealing anew his most holy soul with greater depth and clearness than ever before. Then the Heavenly Mother read and perceived in the interior of her most holy Son all the mysteries of his doings during those 3 days in Jerusalem. She understood also all that had passed in the dispute with the doctors, what Jesus had said, and why he did not manifest himself more clearly as the true Messiah. Many other sacramental secrets he revealed to his Virgin Mother, depositing them with her as in an archive of all the treasures of the incarnate Word, in order that thence he might receive for all of them the return of honor and praise due to him as author of such great wonders. And she, the Virgin Mother, fulfilled all the expectations of the Lord. Then she asked him to rest a while in the field and partake of some nourishment, and he accepted it from the hands of the great lady, the attentive mother of divine wisdom. Ecclesiastes 24:24. During the rest of the journey, the Heavenly Mother discoursed with her sweetest Son on the mysteries interiorly manifested to her concerning the discussion with the teachers. He repeated by word of mouth what he had shown her interiorly. In particular, he told her that these doctors had not recognized him as the Messiah because they were inflated and arrogant in their own knowledge. Their understanding was obscured by the darkness of their pride, so that they could not perceive the divine light shining forth in such profusion from him, while, if they had had the humble and loving desire of seeing the truth, his reasoning would have sufficiently convinced them. On account of these obstacles, they saw it not, though it was open before their eyes. Our Redeemer converted many souls to the way of salvation on this journey, and, as his most holy Mother was with him, he used her as an instrument of his wonderful works. By means of her most prudent words and holy admonitions, he enlightened the hearts of all to whom she spoke. They restored health to many of the sick, they consoled the afflicted and sorrowful, and everywhere they scattered grace and mercy without ever losing an occasion for doing good. Since I have described more particularly some of the wonders performed during other of their journeys, I do not stop to describe any more here, for many chapters and much time would be necessary to relate them all, and there are other things more to the point to be related in this history. They arrived at Nazareth, where they occupied themselves in what I shall record later on. The evangelist Luke compendiously mentions all the mysteries in few words, saying the child Jesus was subject to his parents, namely, Most Holy Mary and Saint Joseph, and that his Heavenly Mother noted and preserved within her heart all these events, and that Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and grace with God and men. Luke 2:52. Of which, as far as my understanding goes, I will speak later on. Just now I wish only to mention that the humility and obedience of our God and Master toward his parents were the admiration of the angels, but so was also the dignity and excellence of his most blessed Mother, who thus merited that the incarnate God should subject himself and resign himself to her care, so much so that she, with the assistance of Saint Joseph, governed him and disposed of him as her own. Although his subjection and obedience was to a certain extent a natural result of her motherhood, yet in order to make proper use of this maternal right and superiority, a different grace was necessary than the one by which she conceived and gave birth to him. The graces necessary for such ministry and office were given to Most Holy Mary in such abundance that they overflowed into the soul of Saint Joseph, making him worthy of being the reputed father of Jesus and the head of this family. To the obedience and subjection of her most holy Son, the great lady, on her part, responded by heroic works. Among her other excellences, she conceived, as it were, an incomprehensible humility and a most heartfelt gratitude for having regained the companionship of her Son. This blessing, of which the heavenly Queen deemed herself unworthy, vastly increased in her most pure heart her love and her anxiety to serve her divine Son. And she was so constant in showing her gratitude, so punctual and solicitous to serve him, kneeling before him and lowering herself to the dust, that it excited the admiration of the highest seraphim. Moreover, she sought with the closest attention to imitate him in all his actions as they became known to her, and exerted herself most anxiously to copy them and reproduce them in her own life. The plenitude of her perfection wounded the heart of our Christ and Lord, and according to our way of speaking, held him bound to her with chains of invincible love. O.C. 11:4. His being thus bound as God and as Son to this heavenly princess gave rise to such an interchange and divine reciprocity of intense love as surpasses all created understanding. For into the ocean of Mary's soul entered all the vast floods of the graces and blessings of the incarnate Word, and this ocean did not overflow, Ecclesiastes 1:7, because it contained the depth and expanse necessary to receive them. But these currents turned back in their source like ebbs and tides of the divinity held between two shores, the Son of God and his mother. This explains the many repetitions of the humble acknowledgment of the spouse, quote, "My beloved to me, and I to him, who feedeth among the lilies, till the day break and shadows retire," unquote. Canticles 2:16. And elsewhere, quote, "I to my beloved, and my beloved to me," Canticles 6:2. And, quote, "I to my beloved, and his turning is to me," Canticles 7:10. The fire of divine love which burned in the heart of our Redeemer, and which he came to spread upon the earth, finding material so prepared and ready at hand as was that of the pure heart of Mary, produced such effects as only the Lord himself, who was the author of them, could properly estimate. There is but one thing which I wish to record, having received an understanding thereof, that in the outward demonstration of his love for his most holy mother, he guided himself not by the natural affections and inclinations of a son, but by her capability of meriting as a pilgrim in mortal life. For he well knew that, if in these demonstrations he would allow his filial love for such a mother to have full sway, he would impede her merits by forcing upon her the continual enjoyment of the delights of her beloved. On this account the Lord restrained to a certain extent the human activity of his love, and permitted his mother, though she had reached the pinnacle of sanctity, to engage in meritorious labor and sufferings, by stopping now and then the flow of visible favors from his divine humanity. In his daily intercourse, the divine child therefore maintained a certain reserve and moderation. Hence, though the most assiduous lady was so solicitous in serving and ministering to him in all his wants, her most holy Son indulged in no such outward tokens of his filial love as would have been adequate return for her loving service. Instruction given to me by the most holy Mary, the Queen of Heaven. My daughter, in all the works of my most holy Son and my own actions are full. My daughter, all the works of my most holy Son and my own actions are full of mysterious instruction and doctrine for the mortals who contemplate them diligently and reverently. The Lord absented himself from me in order that, seeking him in sorrow and tears, I might find him again in joy and with abundant fruits for my soul. I desire that thou imitate me in this mystery, and seek him with such earnestness as to be consumed with a continual longing, without ever in thy whole life coming to any rest until thou holdest him, and canst lose him no more. Canticles 5:4. In order that thou mayest understand better this sacrament of the Lord, remember that the infinite wisdom made men capable of his eternal felicity, and placed them on the way to this happiness, but left them in doubt of its attainment as long as they have not yet acquired it, and thus filled them with joyful hope and sorrowful fear for its final acquisition. This anxiety engenders in men a lifelong fear and abhorrence of sin, by which alone they can be deprived of beatitude, and thus prevent them from being ensnared and misled by the corporal and visible things of this earth. This anxiety the Creator assists by adding to the natural reasoning powers, faith and hope, which are the spurs of their love towards seeking and finding their last end. Besides these virtues and others infused at baptism, he sends his inspirations and helps to keep awake the soul in the absence of its Lord, and to prevent forgetfulness of him and of itself while deprived of his amiable presence. Thus it pursues the right course until it finds the great goal, where all its inclinations and longings shall be satisfied. Hence thou canst estimate the listless ignorance of mortals, and how few stop to consider the mysterious order of the creation and justification of all the works of the Almighty, tending toward this exalted end. From this forgetfulness flow so many evils endured by men, while they appropriate so many earthly goods and deceitful delights, as if they could ever find in them their ultimate end. The height of perversity opposed to the order of the Creator is that mortals, in this transitory and short life, rejoice in visible things, as if they were their last end, while they ought, on the contrary, to make use of creatures to gain, not to lose, the highest good. Do thou, therefore, my dearest, be mindful of this dangerous human folly. Consider all delights and joys of the world as insanity, its laughing as sorrow, sensible enjoyment as self-deceit, as the source of foolishness, which intoxicates the heart and hinders and destroys all true wisdom. Live in constant and holy fear of losing eternal life, and rejoice in nothing except in the Lord, until thou obtainest full possession of him. Fly from conversation with men and dread its dangers. If sometimes God places thee in the way of human intercourse for his glory, and by obedience, although thou must trust in his protection, yet never be remiss or careless in guarding thyself from contamination. Do not trust thy natural disposition when there is question of friendship and close intercourse with others. In this consists for thee a greater danger, for the Lord has given thee a pleasing and mild disposition, so that thou mayest naturally incline toward him. Resist none of his intentions and make a proper return for the blessings bestowed upon thee. But as soon as thou givest entrance to creatures into thy heart, thou wilt certainly be carried away and alienated by them from the highest good, and thou wilt pervert the intentions and operations of his infinite wisdom in thy behalf. It would certainly be most unworthy of thee to divert that which is most noble in thy nature toward an unseemly end. Raise thyself above all created things, and above thyself,